Scholars such as Julia Basso and colleagues acknowledge and encourage further study on the growing use of contemporary meditation in Western contexts. So, to better understand meditation in a contemporary context, I conducted a participant observation ethnographic field study this spring. And today I will share with you my research setting and context, my method and findings, and my conclusions. First, the setting and context. I conducted my research at St. Julian's Episcopal Church in Douglasville, Georgia. That is about 20 miles west of Atlanta, and it's one of about 100 Episcopal churches in Atlanta and 1,000 Episcopal churches nationwide, 7,000 that is. And Basso and her colleagues and Kabat-Zinn and others say that the contemporary context of meditative practices is the Buddhist and other Eastern traditions, but what takes place at the Episcopal Church is decidedly in the Christian contemplative tradition, straight from the Bible. Father Thomas Keating is known as the principal developer and spreader of a particular kind of contemplative prayer known as centering prayer. He was a monk in Western Massachusetts and wrote more than 30 books. He's widely quoted. He conducted workshops, etc. He's part of a full contemplative outreach project now. As Purser talks about in McMindfulness, it really is an industry with all of the books and workshops and so forth. And he says that centering prayer is the pure gift of God, that it's beyond thoughts, meaning it's not about focusing on a particular thought or not focusing on a particular thought. It's beyond words. It's not about mantras or anything. And it's beyond emotions. It's not about focusing on particular emotions, but letting God be in the center, fully in a person. And of course, when that happens, the emotion that emerges is love. The particular technique used for the centering prayer is called Lectio Divina, and that's a process by which the practitioners read a sacred text, a portion thereof, and really deeply ruminate on it. They actually have a conversation with God and then have a conversation with their fellow practitioners. I attended March 12th and March 19th contemplative prayer sessions at St. Julian's. And at these two sessions, we also had the edition of another book that we read in advance and discussed during the sessions. And that book was Thoughts in Solitude by Thomas Merton, another very important book in Christian contemplative prayer. And I also attended contemplative prayer sessions on March 14th and March 21st. At all four of the sessions, we did the Lectio Divina, and while the Bible typically is the sacred text we read and ruminate upon and discuss with God and each other. In this case, we read the book Revelations of Divine Love. That's one of the earliest surviving English language texts by a woman, a very important book in Christendom. I studied it at Candler School of Theology, and it's written by Dame Julian of Norwich, known as the saint for the unfinished and the person for whom St. Julian's Episcopal Church is named. Our sessions took place at the church's library, you see here, and one of the sessions took place in the smaller prayer room when the library was being used for a vestry meeting. There were 5 of us at one session, 6 of us at 2 of the sessions, and 7 at one session. And the practitioners' ages were about 60 average. We were all college educated, all longtime Episcopalians, and none of us was a first timer, even myself. This was my home church for several years. starting back in 2014, and I had attended these contemplative prayer sessions before. So given that context, this is the method I utilized and my findings. Blomberg and colleagues give us some good tips on how to make sure our ethnographic research permits us to be really embedded and learn as much as we possibly can about what's going on. And I followed all of those steps before, during, and after the research, and particularly the sessions. And I was particularly informed by the way I was able to get information, sort of simulate interviewing simply by participating in the discussion with the others. I took field notes both in my notebook and on the handouts the leaders distributed. I wrote a timeline of exactly what happened. The leaders said what would happen, and it did indeed happen like that. They said the bell would ring when it's time for us to start reading and ruminating on and discussing the text. The bell would ring again when it's time for us to go into 20 minutes of silent prayer. And the bell would ring a third time when it's time to end the prayer and go into our final discussion. And that is exactly what happened. I found that while transcribing my notes, I was really able to get more deeply into understanding what was happening during those sessions. The people's words were so revealing. And given my findings, I was able to draw several conclusions. Primarily, I draw the conclusion that this intense feeling of being connected to God and each other that the participants conveyed is largely a function of the traditions of the Episcopal Church and the demographics of this particular contemplative prayer group. The church is known for being a cerebral church. So the reading, it's known as being formal in some senses, although there also is a low church version, but just that it was on time. The fact that so much of the time is spent discussing and reading. Williams, in The Age of Attention, talks about what it looks like when people are really intent on preserving their attention. And you could see that in these participants. And in addition to all of the scholarly knowledge I've gained that I've shared with you, I gained some real personal benefits from being embedded. Kuhn and Tresh talk about the idea of going native versus being native. Because I had been with this group before and had done this before, I felt fully embedded. I got the adrenaline rush of the fellowship just as everyone else did. I was a recipient of their prayers and recommendations. For instance, a silent retreat was recommended for me that I will be attending later this month, and I gained great insight from the depth and quality of the discussion. So we'll end this presentation with my sharing with you a few words from Thomas Burton. Again, he's known as being the principal developer and spreader of the centering prayer. And he brings us full circle to this idea that this is really a psychology craze that's going on, where people are looking for this mindfulness, and he calls it divine therapy. And